Solo, a Star Wars story, is getting murdered in the box office. How bad is this? Does it have something to do with the boycott? Is it fatigue of Star Wars? We're gonna get into that and more. This is the Nerdy News Rundown. We're back, baby! Good morning if you're watching this in the morning, or good evening, or whatever when you're watching it whenever. That's good. What is up, everyone? I am Josh. This is the Den of Nerds, and this is the Nerdy News Rundown, your daily dose for nerdy news. And yes, the show is back. Kind of. If you're new to the channel or if you've never seen the show before, this is the news show that I was doing a couple of weeks back. It is Monday through Friday. It's going to be in the mornings. Basically just a show where I break down all of the news that's going on in the nerdy world. And yeah, the show's back, but today in particular, we're going to focus on one topic, and that is Solo box office. I mean, this is something that a lot of people want me to talk about anyways. It's big news out there. A lot of people are talking about it. Tomorrow we'll be back to regularly going over a ton of different topics, picking what's really, really popular out there. But for today's show, completely focusing on the Solo box office. Oh, and quickly, before we get into all of this, I need to do a shout out real quick. We're gonna shout out Gamerman RPG King, who got the nerd card question correct in my latest Thrawn in episode 9 video. So shout out to you, Gamerman. Oh yeah, and we'll do another nerd card question at the end of this video too. Okay, so Solo, wow. How bad is it? Really bad. So the numbers are officially in for Solo, a Star Wars story, and yeah, it's really, really bad. On a 3-day weekend, it did $84 million, and the 4-day Memorial Day weekend only saw a total gross domestically of $103 million. Overseas, it's even worse. Total, in all of the markets that Solo opened up in, it saw a $65 million opening. This is considered by most of the trades out there and most of the people reporting that this is really bad. It's really, really bad. And so let's talk about a little bit exactly how bad it is. Then I'm going to kind of get into why I think this happened. So here we go. So I think the total projections now, and it really depends. It depends a lot on this second weekend. It'll be very interesting to see what kind of a drop-off Solo has, because Deadpool had a drop-off that was way bigger than most people predicted, which is a whole nother story. Maybe we'll get into that tomorrow. But right now, it looks like Solo is on track to make around $400 million total gross. That would come in at a huge loss. And let me just make a comparison here, okay? The Justice League movie, oh my God, yes, I'm having to put Justice League and a Star Wars movie in a comparative point, and honestly, I can't believe it, but it's true. Justice League made around $560 million, I believe. I'd have to double check on the actual figures, but in either case, that was considered a huge loss for Justice League. Now, the similarities between Justice League and Solo are actually like a lot. So Solo had to do reshoots, reshot about 70% of the film, maybe even more. This is, of course, after Lord and Miller were fired from the project and Ron Howard was brought on to finish it up. Similarly, with Justice League, you had a Zack Snyder version that was all but left behind, and then you had the Joss Whedon version where Joss came in, tried to fix the thing up, and set it back on course. And so both of those movies had their budgets like balloon up because they were trying to put out, seemingly trying to put out a better product. Now, on top of that, you have to understand that movies like this nowadays cost lots and lots of money to promote. Estimations on the promotion for Solo were $250 million. Now, I'm not a math wizard, but when you start to add that stuff up, maybe a $200 million budget with at least $100 million in reshoots, add $250 million on that on promotion, I mean, you're looking at $550 million. If this movie only comes in at $400 million, that will see a massive loss for Lucasfilm. So that in and of itself is pretty bad, but the thing that really makes this story terrible, and the thing that's really got me as a Star Wars fan concerned, is what this is doing to the brand, to the reputation of the Star Wars brand. Now, I'm going to come back to this point in a second here because it's so important that I need to really hammer this home, but Star Wars is obviously not bulletproof. And despite, a lot of people being on this really negative side of the fan base right now, there's obviously people on the positive side of the fan base right now, and there's just a lot of dissonance between these two sides. But I will say this, you cannot, even if you love Star Wars, even if you're such a big fan of Star Wars and you love the current Lucasfilm Star Wars, you cannot just put your head in the sand and be like, no, everything's fine, we're totally good, these are just butthurt fanboys, it's whatever. That's the wrong attitude to take. I mean, honestly, as someone who loves Star Wars, like way more than almost any other property out there, I'm really, really concerned. Once again, just recycle this. A lot of you guys that are subscribed already know this. I liked The Last Jedi, loved Rogue One, and loved The Force Awakens. So I'm pretty much like a fan of the current Star Wars. Having said that, there are a lot of problems and a lot of issues going on with Lucasfilm right now, and I personally did not like Solo at all. Now, that's really subjective opinion, and I actually have a video coming out about what I didn't like about Solo, and that video is taking me way too long to get out, and I apologize, but it will drop later today, so go check that out if you're interested. But more to the point, the perception of the brand is not a subjective thing. It's pretty objective to look at how a brand is being received out there and understand if it is resonating with people or not. It's called the marketplace, and putting out a big movie like this and seeing how little of the revenue that it was expected to get it actually garnered is a huge red flag, like an undeniable, you can't deny it, kind of a red flag. So it's bad. And with Disney, it's interesting because they've actually made a ton of money on most of their Star Wars films. However, they have then taken that money and sort of reinvested it into the Star Wars brand. I mean, you have these two massive Star Wars parks coming. You have this live action show. You have a new animated show. There's all the money they put out in books. There's all the money they're going to spend on episode 9. And you have the Rian Johnson trilogy and the series of films by Dan and Dave. I gotta be honest, if I was Alan Horn or Bob Iger right now, I would be crapping my pants. This is a terrible outcome for Lucasfilm, and there's a lot of questions out there, and I'm trying to be completely unbiased here, but something needs to be done, which we'll get to in a second. But on top of a massive financial failure, I think Solo and more just Star Wars in general is at this place where we really can't deny the damage that has been done to the brand, and we have to start to think about what we can do moving forward. All right, so let's talk about what happened. How did this happen? How did this movie, which projections going into it were around 150 and 170 million, how did it underperform to that level, and what is the root cause here? And so the first question that just pops up into my mind is this because it is a crap movie? And honestly, no, it's not because it's a crap movie. In fact, I don't think it's a crap movie. I really didn't care for it, but I can't objectively sit here and tell you that I think it's like a terrible film. It's passable as a movie. It's just that my expectations of what a Star Wars movie should be and what this movie delivers are so far away. But once again, that's completely subjective. That's just my opinion. In general, I've seen a lot of Star Wars fans that really, really like Solo. And what's really interesting to me is I've seen a lot of fans out there that haven't liked a single Disney Star Wars movie thus far, and Solo is just doing it for them. They really, really like Solo for whatever reason. So it is not because it is just a really, really bad movie. I mean, overall, it is scoring way, way lower on Rotten Tomatoes than a lot of the other Disney Star Wars films, but it's not even close to like a 60, 50, 40% on Rotten Tomatoes. So in that way, the Justice League comparison, sort of falls apart. Justice League was sort of like this thing where there's a lot of ill will out there. There's a lot of bad product being put out there, and the faith in that brand to deliver something great just didn't exist anymore. Now, you could say that some of that was going on with Solo because of what happened with The Last Jedi Backlash, but in general, for casual movie-going audiences, I do not think that the Rotten Tomatoes score or the perception of the film being negative negative were a factor much at all in the total gross. So what about this boycott business? I mean, I've seen all of the videos by now. You probably have too. A lot of people on that side of the fan divide are taking a lot of credit for this movie bombing, and they're all really, really pleased with themselves. So how much of that boycott did actually affect it? Well, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I think it had no effect whatsoever. In fact, I think it had a pretty decent effect on the revenue, but I would probably put it at only about 20% of the total revenue lost. And what I mean by that is I look at a Star Wars movie and the strength behind that brand, at least the perceived strength behind that brand, and I think almost any Star Wars film is a lock for $800 million to $1 billion total gross. If we lose out at like $500 or $600 million of that, I'd put 20% of that loss on the boycott in general, specific to the people that were like, I refuse to see this movie because I am disappointed in what Lucasfilm is doing. Now that's no small amount of money, but it can't possibly account for all of those empty seats in these theaters. What about the fact that nobody really wanted a Solo movie in general? For me personally, I think that has an equal effect to the boycott when it comes to the gross that was lost for Solo. Meaning, if we can put the lost revenue from the boycott at about 20%, I would say another 20% comes from Star Wars fans that just didn't ever want a Han Solo movie. You have to understand, guys, there's a lot of Star Wars fans out there that don't like Disney Star Wars, but they're not necessarily in this camp of like, oh, I'm going to boycott, I'm going to join this movement, I'm going to make my voice heard. No, these are like the quieter fans. They're maybe not on social media a lot. I know a lot of casuals. For me, a lot of them are my friends' parents and just older fans in general. So it's not like they're actively boycotting the movie, but their interest in Star Wars has waned because of Disney Star Wars. Now, personally, like I said, I love The Force Awakens. I absolutely love Rogue One, and I liked The Last Jedi. But for a lot of fans out there, they didn't like any of those, and they just don't like this direction that Disney is heading in. And I believe that those fans kind of accounted for a lot of this lost revenue. On top of that, even people that love everything that's going on in Lucasfilm right now, a lot of those people did not want to go see a Han Solo movie, and this was only compounded with all of the stuff that we heard from behind the scenes. Now, I know some fans out there are like, well, why can't you just separate it? Why can't you just go see the movie and ignore all of this story and this narrative of what was going on, directors being fired and this and that? And as I've said before, and as I'll continue to say, it's 2018. You can't do that anymore. We no longer separate what our experience is of watching the production of a film and the film itself. Now, I know that's only the case for certain people out there, but when you couple that with the people that are just never wanted a Han Solo movie, I think that accounts for another huge percentage of the people that didn't go see Solo. Now, Lucasfilm is talking about Star Wars fatigue. Star Wars fatigue. That's the big thing out there. That's the narrative that they're pushing. Interestingly, we haven't really heard much from like Kathleen Kennedy, Bob Iger, any of the big wigs. The head of distribution, and I'm blanking on his name right now, but the head of distribution has been talking about this idea of Star Wars fatigue. Is it perhaps the fact that Disney in general and Star Wars has been putting out so many movies in the last couple of months and in the last couple of weeks? I mean, it does kind of seem odd to do a movie like The Last Jedi and then just several months later pump out a film like Solo. And so I definitely think that that had some kind of an effect, but I'd probably only put that at around 10%. Now, a lot of people are talking about this Memorial Day weekend phenomena. Movies are always bad on Memorial Day weekend. They never track well. Well, maybe, but this is Star Wars, and so I do believe that had some kind of an effect for it, but not really. I mean, the hardcore Star Wars fan base will go out and see a Star Wars movie, or at least we thought, no matter what circumstances were out there. Remember when people thought The Force Awakens was going to be hurt because it released in December, which is traditionally a bad month for moviegoers because you got weather, you got snow, you got Santa Claus, all these other things? Yeah, it didn't matter at all. People were clamoring for Star Wars, and they got their butts into the theaters. And so overall, I think those are the factors. I think you have a fan base divided right now. I think you had the boycott playing a big role. I think a lot of fans that aren't necessarily super mad or mad enough to do a boycott never really wanted Solo ever. And so that leads into it. You have slight movie-going fatigue and slight Star Wars fatigue. There's plenty of time for us to move past this hate and vitriol, but there's also plenty of time for Lucasfilm to make some changes and to acknowledge some of the problems that are happening in the fan base right now. Now, once again, I'm not going to get into exactly what that looks like, but right now, they're on the precipice of this turning into a real disaster. I mean, people are making their voices heard, and you really don't want to disenfranchise or alienate these people. I mean, these are people that are fans of Star Wars. You might not agree with them, and you certainly don't have to agree with the way they conduct themselves. But at the end of the day, their opinions as a fan are still valid. If they feel like Star Wars has turned its back on them, they are going to turn their back on Star Wars. That is not good. And so something needs to be happening. We have plenty of time. There has to be something done before Celebration next year, or Kathy Kennedy is going to be booed off stage, and this brand is going to just continue to spiral out of control. So that's the news out there, guys. Solo really getting beat up in the box office. I tried to break down exactly what is happening and why I think it is happening. I certainly want to know your thoughts about all of this in the comment section below. Let me know, did you like Solo? Did you not like Solo? Like I said, my video about my feelings about Solo will be dropping later today, but this is just the news going over what is happening right now in Star Wars. And yeah, I tried not to be negative. I tried to just give you my honest, subjective thoughts about this, and I just can't be one of those channels that's like in complete denial about what is going on. Now, I think it's gonna be fine. I think we can get past this, but certainly changes need to be made, and people need to start to acknowledge that this is an actual problem. I mean, dollars really speak loudly, and so, look, boycotters, your voices were heard. People that never wanted a Han Solo movie, your voices were heard, and now it falls to Lucasfilm to really correct this course and to try to bridge the gap between these different sides of the fandom. Alright, before we get out of here, I want to check your nerd card, see how much you know about these Star Wars movies. The question today is, what was the 3-day gross for Rogue One? We've been going over the Solo numbers, checking out what it did in a 3-day and a 4-day, and I'm curious, do you know how much money Rogue One made in just 3 days? When you compare that to what Solo made in 4 days, the picture becomes even more clear. Something is wrong. You can click below to watch more dope videos. You can click our icon to subscribe, and I will be back giving you all of the nerdy news tomorrow.